Alright guys, well it's a rainy weekend. It's the perfect time to start taping. So we're going to do a dustless taping. That means no sanding whatsoever. I'll tell you the materials that I'm going to be using. So we're going to be using the green lid all-purpose mud. And we're not going to do the traditional outside corners with the steel corner bead. We're going to be using this, which is like a composite material. And it's a lot quicker. And then for the inside corners, we're going to be using this. This stuff is a lot more expensive than to just use regular paper tape like this for the inside corners. But it saves you a lot of time because you really only have to do one coat on it. As far as the cost between this and the outside corner bead, it's about a wash, but this is much quicker. And I'll show you why in a little bit. And then for any joints, butt seams, or tapered, we're going to be using this. This is extra strength mesh tape. A lot of people don't like mesh tape because it does fail, but this is extra strength. So in other words, it's got the crisscross going this way, but then it's also got diagonals. I've been using this stuff for a long time. It's never failed. I use all-purpose mud for everything. I don't use the blue bucket. I don't use anything else. I use a hawk and usually a 10-inch knife, and then I get down to an 8 and a 6-inch knife. But I'll explain a lot of that as I go along, so let's get right into it. I always like to start at the topmost joints and work my way down. So in this room, that joint right there is going to be the first one, and I'll just keep doing the highest ones until I get to the lowest ones. Take over for me?
Yeah.
Okay. No, we're not using foam. So since this is temporary in here, I'm going to tape as much as I can around here. Obviously it's not ideal to not have the sheetrock go all the way down so I can finish the corner, but it is what it is. I'll just stop it there, and then once I get my geothermal system installed with the wall unit over there, I'll take that stuff out, patch it in. It's no big deal. Patchwork with sheetrock is quick work and it's no big deal. So I'll just get as much as I can. And that way when I'm done taping this room, I'm like 98% done. It'll take a half an hour to do all that. So this paper that I'm using for the inside corners, it's got like a thinner paper on the outside, and then this is almost kind of like a cardboard feeling, but it's much more dense, and I think it's some sort of composite, not really paper. And so is the outside, really. It's got some sort of, I don't know, if you felt it, you'd know what I'm talking about, but it's almost like a plasticky feel, but it's plasticky, papery feel. So the idea is when you're putting this in, you want to squeeze all the excess out of the main area here, which is like an inch altogether. And then once you get that out and there's no lumps in it, then you want to feather this edge and put pressure on this edge. You can see there's like little bumps on it to help it stick into the mud. So once you get all the bumps out and this thing is sitting flat like that, then you got to feather the edge. Put the taping knife right on the edge here and just push that in real tight. And what that does is it sinks it in the mud so that when you're done, you only have to put one little feather coat on the outside just to feather that out a little bit. And you don't have to bring the knife into the inside corner at all. When you're doing the first coat on this, they say to let it dry, but sometimes I do it the same time I'm doing the embedding. So, but regardless of when you do it, when you're doing that first coat, which is actually the last coat too, on top of it, you only have to go about 1/4 of an inch in just to feather out that edge, and then it's done. And so this edge over here doesn't even get any mud on it. That just gets painted. So that's why it saves so much time. It takes a little bit more to embed it because you gotta go back and forth a few times and get all the mud out, and then you gotta press hard on that edge. But from there, it's a lot less work, because normally you got to put 3 coats on top of this once it's embedded, which I always do 1 coat right off the bat. As soon as I embed it, I put 1 coat on. But normally you do 1 coat on one side, 1 coat on the other, and then you let it dry and do 1 coat on here and 1 coat here. And then on the last coat, you do both of them at the same time and you feather it out. But still, that's a lot of different times that you got to come back and let things dry and then feather it out on one side, and you're going all the way into the edge. And if you're not careful, you'll break that paper with normal conventional paper. This paper, which I call it paper, but I don't think it really is, this is like a one-shot deal, and you just come back and feather it out, and that's it. The problem with that is everything around it really needs 3 coats. So like these screw holes really need 3 coats. So the problem is it's not as efficient as you think, because you still got to go right next to it to get 3 coats on these, and the mesh on the butt joints and the taper joints. So you're still going in the same areas like 3 times or 4 times, but you don't have to mess with the corner, which that takes the most time though, so it does save you a lot of time. So you're still making the same amount of trips around the room, because you're still getting these screw holes that are right next to this, but it's just a lot less messing around. You're moving around really quick because you're not having to get all the corners. So I haven't been using this stuff for that long, a few years now, but it's been working really good. It is expensive for this stuff. You're looking at about 25 cents a foot, because I think it's like $25 for 100 feet. So it's obviously way more expensive than corner tape, which is stupid cheap. But what's time worth? Because if you can save, let's just say in this room, if you can save, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours in this room, maybe I'm exaggerating that, but maybe it's 2 or 3 hours, still, that pays for it. Plus, I also think you're getting a stronger corner too, because paper tape, especially when you get it wet, is super weak. And if you have any movement in anything, which you really shouldn't, but if you do, this paper will hold up. That other stuff doesn't. So for the outside corner, it's not the same stuff at all. This is like really plasticky type. Almost no paper feel to it at all. It's more plasticky. And they say you can use these for inside corners too, but they're a little bit thicker. So I don't think you could get the same results with just one little finish coat, feathering it out after you put it in. I think they say that that's what to do, but I don't believe that it would be that smooth. I think you'd end up with a line, because this stuff is about twice the thickness of the other stuff, which is good because for an outside corner you want it to be pretty sturdy. So I just use this for outside corners and that's it. But you really got to put a lot of mud on that outside corner, because you saw how liberal I was with this, with putting the mud on. And when I squeezed it out, almost nothing came out, which means it used every bit of that, which means it could have probably even used more. So it's hard to really get it gooped on there liberal like that, because it wants to fall down on you, but you just gotta goop it up real good and put it on there. I always like to do the corners first, start with the ceiling, get all the ceilings done, then work on my corners going down, my vertical corners. Usually there's, 4 or more corners in a room vertically, and then I'll work on those going down, and then I'll work on my taper joints, and then the last thing is going to be the butt joints. And the reason I do the butt joints last is because if you put it first and you got the tape up here going down here, then when you go to do this taper joint, you'll hit that tape going across. So I always like to do the butt joints last. So when I get to that point of the butt joints, I'll slow it down and I'll show you some techniques. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I always have the knife at an angle like this. So you're pushing the mud out as you're going. I don't ever go at a 90-degree angle like this. Sometimes you'll need to go like this, and sometimes you need to go like this, but never straight. I always poke the knife in there just to make sure I'm in the apex of the corner. You can see I'm a little bit short up there. That's a little bit more than you want to normally be short, normally about 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch, but it's not going to make a difference. If there's a little crack on that last little inch, you'll never even see it. First pass to get all the lumps out. Second pass, you just press a little bit harder. And you're pretty much going right into the apex of the corner. But then on the third pass, you're trying to stay on by 1/2 to 1/4 of an inch, right on the edge. You don't want to go into the apex of the corner. Do that twice. Twice for the top and twice for the bottom. And that's pretty much it. And then you just kind of feather things out if they need to be. I always like to work from left to right too. It's just easier for me. Like when you're putting the mud on the ceiling, going like this is just so much easier than to have to go like this. On the wall, it doesn't really matter too much. I can go both ways, it doesn't matter. But it's just a personal preference. I'm right-handed. I'm mostly ambidextrous, but I do have my preferences. So on a butt joint like this knife is 10 inches. I like to go down the middle, and then I like to overlap it halfway on both sides. So that's 10 inches plus 5 inches plus 5 inches. If you start out with 20 inches wide, by the time you got your 3 coats on, you're probably almost 30 inches wide, which is perfect for a butt joint. And since there's no taper in the middle, and you got the tape on there, it makes it really thick right in the middle. So what I like to do is get my first pass. So that's about as wide as I want it for right now in the first pass. And then what I'll do is just feather the edge, put more pressure on this side, just to sort of feather the edge in. And then I'll take and go right down the middle, very lightly. And then that's it, I leave it. So if you'll notice, there's a ridge right there, and there's a ridge right there, but the middle is smooth. So the middle is just about as thin as it can be, and I packed out the sides. So that's thicker right there and right there than it is in the middle. So now when I go to my second coat, I'm gonna overlap that, and keep it thin in the middle again, keep it wider, keep it thicker on the sides, so that I got a nice smooth transition and it's not humped up in the middle there. Because if you just keep adding stuff in the middle and the sides get feathered, then the sides have less than it does in the middle, and then it doesn't look good when you have a light shining down the wall like the sun. So if you can see, it's really rough right here. That's good. See how it's rough right here? It's thicker right here and right here than it is in the middle. That's what I want. Now I was doing that as an example, but normally you'd want to do the taper joints first. Sometimes if you're just in a spot and you don't want to go back to that spot, you're already in the spot, so you just get the butt joint. But most of the time, you want to get the taper joint first. And the taper joint, I always like to swipe the sides, get all the excess stuff off, and then I go down the middle and just lightly get it. Don't press down too hard, because you want to leave a lot of that material in there. A lot of people make the mistake of making the first pass really tight and they really scrunch it down. Watch what happens when I do that. You can see the tape. You don't want that. You want to leave some in there, because what happens is if you leave it, if you press really hard, the knife will actually bend into the contour and it'll take away a lot of that stuff. Plus, this stuff shrinks. So even if you got it perfectly flat, it would still shrink, and then you wouldn't have enough in there. So I like to make sure that I got a good healthy amount. Taking the sides down first, and then just lightly, at a very extreme angle to the wall, go through like this. So you really want to press it in there at first to embed the mud. But then you go back and you put a light coat on top of it. And then you skim it down. And then you float it. And if you have some screws that aren't set all the way, make sure you get them. And if you have little spots like this where the screws missed, there's paper sticking out. That'll catch the knife and it'll make it skip. So what you want to do is just take the back of the knife, put it right on the hole, and kind of go like this. Give it a little divot. That way it's in, not out. Now if you go over top of that, you'll see it's in. If it's sticking out, it's going to mess you up. And I like to keep the swath going around these screws as thin as possible, because when you're done, you don't have to sand the whole thing down. All you have to do is feather the edge to the sheetrock, to the bare sheetrock. You're just feathering the edge with a sponge. So if you have a blotch here and a blotch here and a blotch here, there's a lot more surface area that you need to worry about rather than just getting the outside of this. So that's why a nice thin swath going down is the most ideal. It's really important that you don't see that tape when you're done. If you see something like that, put some more mud on it. You don't want to see that tape at all after this first coat. Otherwise you're going to end up doing 4 or 5 coats, not 3. This is how you want it to look when you're done. No tape exposed. And you go through a lot of mud like this too. Like this little 12-foot section here is almost a whole hawk worth of mud. So up here I had to make this hole to run this thermostat wire down because there was blocking in the wall and insulation. So I'm going to show you how I make a flange patch to fit in there without having to use a 2x4 on the back and then screw that in and then screw it to that. There's a much easier way to do this. So if it's 3.5 by 4 1/8, we'll add 1.5 inches to each side, which means we'll add 3 inches to this side. So that would become 6.5 by 7 1/8. So this piece here is just about 7 inches. That's close enough to 7 1/8. We don't need it to be exactly. This piece is 4 feet tall, so this is going to be the tapered edge. So I don't want to use the tapered edge. So we'll just start it here. We'll cut 1 inch, and then we'll go 6.5, so that's 7.5. So that's going to be our piece. So on the back side, now you want to get the dimensions that it actually is. So you want to come over, start at 1.5 inches. It's going to be the size of the flange. So now we want to go 4 1/8 from there. So 1, 2, 3, 4 1/8. So now going the other way, we want to start out at 1.5 inches and go 3.5, so that's 1, 2, 3.5. So now we'll just connect the dots. Now we'll cut this away here. Cut this. Okay. Now the trick is to bend it and pull it off the paper. So there's your flange patch. So there it goes. Put a bunch of mud around the flange. I like to put a little bit right here too, so it sticks to the sides. Now you can do that without using any screws. It seems like a big process, but after you do it a couple times, it takes like 2 minutes or less each time. So once you get all the mud squeezed out of it, then I like to just go ahead and put a first coat right on it. So if there's one thing I could teach you guys, even if I teach you nothing else, just learn this one thing. If you want to do taping, you need a good light, and you need to learn how to use it. So this wall right now, looks good. It looks like you could probably almost paint it. And it's only got a first coat on it. But that's only because the light isn't that good. If the sun was shining down that wall right now, you'd see that it needs 2 more coats. So the trick is to have a good light. I happen to have a portable light. Most people just have either a halogen light or an LED light that you plug in. But you need something that's like at least 1,000 lumens. This is 2,000 lumens. And what you need to do is put the light right up against the wall, like this. So now you can see all the imperfections. And if you don't put that light within a foot from the wall and shine it down it, then you won't see this stuff. If you take this light and put it back here, you can't even see that stuff. And if you just let the natural light from the, in this case, recessed lights shine on it, you won't see this stuff. So it's really important that you put that light on there. Look at that. Now, like I said, this is only a first coat, and this needs at least 2 more coats. Well, not at least, it just needs 2 more coats. There's some people that say that they can get away with just doing 2 coats and not doing a 3rd coat, but I guarantee you if you look down their wall, it's not going to happen. Especially butt joints. Butt joints always need a 3rd coat. Sometimes you can get away with, on the taper joints, you can get away with 2 coats, but the reason why you can't really get away with it is because the stuff shrinks. So when you run that knife across there, it makes it very smooth, but then it shrinks. And you always end up with this line right here. That's the line where the joint is. And you can't get rid of that with 2 coats. It really needs 3. Now these corners, because I'm using this straight flex stuff, the perfect 90 corners, you can get away with just putting that on and then putting a first coat on top of it. But what I like to do is take this light and put it at the bottom of the wall, just about as close as you can get it, about 6 inches or so. No more than a foot though. And just let that shine. And now, the camera doesn't really pick it up that well, but look at that. That looked almost perfect without this light. And that's looking really bad. But that's only a first coat, so it's not a big deal. It's fine to look bad. As a matter of fact, if you're trying to make it look good on the first coat, then you're not doing it right. The whole goal is to put enough mud on there so that the tape doesn't show through anymore. Which in this case, there's very little evidence of the tape. So I'm going to go through and do a 2nd coat on this whole room, on everything. And I'll show you guys little bits and pieces, but I don't want to bore you to death with every little move that I make. So I'll show you little things here and there, and we'll come back to the 3rd coat. And just like when I did the first coat, you want to start right on the ceiling. Noah, what are you doing? You are making a mess.
Wait.
But you're having fun, aren't you?
Wait. Let me build a house.
You're building a house?
Yeah, for you can go in.
I don't think that's how you build a house.
It's dry. It's dry. It's... Wait, where's the hole? There?
Alright, so we're back to the spot where I was showing you the example. I turned off all the lights in this room so you could see, and sometimes it is good to do this. You turn off every other light except for the one that you're trying to project on the wall. And now I got it about a foot from the wall and you can see all the imperfections. So now step back, put the light like this. Now you can't see nearly as many. You can still see some, but now you can see everything. So to do this wall so that it shows up on the camera better, I'm gonna keep all the lights off and just have this light on, and that's it. I'll show you how I do this second coat. Really, on the tapered joints, you don't even really need a wider knife. You can actually use a 6-inch knife because all you're trying to do is cover up the screws and the tape. And then you could literally get away with something 4 or 5 inches wide. But I just use a 10-inch knife because it's easier, because I'm gonna hit the butt joints at the same time. And rather than keep switching knives, I'll just keep one 10-inch knife for the whole thing. So the first thing you wanna do is pick up this knife and look down it with one eye closed and see where the bow is. So in this case, the bow is on this side. So you wanna make sure that that's the opposite side that's on the wall. So you want the bow to stick out away from the wall as you're taping. So then the second thing you wanna do is scrape all these little pieces off first. Like this, and this, and this, and this. You wanna just scrape that all down. So take the knife, put it sideways like you do taping, and just go like this. Just go over the whole thing real quick. Now that whole entire section is done, even this butt joint. So then put it on pretty thick. You shouldn't ever hear the dry scrape. You should always be wet, except for like if the edge is scraping, that's fine. But put enough on there and run right down the wall with it. Now, one thing that probably a lot of people don't realize is that when you put on wet mud like this, it wets down the mud that's underneath of it. So what it does essentially is it kind of melts the old stuff to the new stuff, so that if there's any little ridges, they get softened up, and then when you run the knife down them, even the old ridges that were dry are now wet and they're being smoothed out. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but it's actually a really big helping factor to get smooth walls. So what you want to do is, instead of doing like a 4-foot section and then immediately going over it and scraping it down, let it sit there. That's why you run out the whole wall. So now it only takes like 10 seconds and then it wets down the mud that's underneath of it that was already dry. So now you can go back and feather it out. A lot of times I like to hit the edges first, just to take off all the excess mud, and then I'll go in the middle and not get it quite as deep. You don't want to put quite as much pressure on the middle because it's going to shrink. So you want to leave just a little bit more mud on there, but by taking off the outside first, scraping it real tight with a lot of pressure. You're taking off a lot of the excess mud that if you were to just run down the center and do that, it would be running off the knife on both sides. So I like to take it and just go like this and leave those two ridges right in the center. And then I like to put the knife at a more extreme angle, put less pressure on it, and then run it down like this. And what I'm doing is leaving more mud on the middle, because I'm not really trying to skim coat this. I'm just trying to fill it in for the second coat. The skim coating will come on the third coat. So right now it doesn't need to look perfect because it's gonna shrink again. So you don't need to try to get it perfect. You just need to fill it in again, and then on a third coat, you'll skim it. So now on the butt joints, you can see I left these ridges outside of the tape. If I left the ridges on the tape, then I'd have a hump in the center. But now leaving them out here, it makes this part thicker on the outside versus the inside where I don't want it. So now I kind of make it thicker, wider. And with the ridges going up and down, and I scrape them, now when I put another coat on and I leave it for a few seconds, it'll again kind of transition the two muds, dry and wet, and make them both wet, and then I can feather it out a lot easier. So I'm just coming out a little bit more than I was before. So again, I'm gonna take the outsides, put lots of pressure on those to wring them out. And then I'll go on the inside with less pressure and more of an extreme angle. The more you go like this, the more it's gonna take off mud easier. And you can also put pressure on it for the outsides. The more you go like this, the less it's gonna take off the mud, but the more it smooths it. And that's a piece of paper, you don't want that. So again, you don't want that to look perfect right now because that's not your skim coat, that's just your second coat. Some people will actually do a fourth coat on the butt joints. I don't get involved in that, but I have done it on sun jobs where they're really picky about how it comes out. So you can see overall that just looks a lot better than it did when I started, but it's not supposed to be perfect. So don't try to make it perfect because then you won't build it up enough. So in this case, because the taper joint is pretty small and the butt joint is fairly small too, I'll just put mud on both of them at the same time. And that's what's called walking the dog. When you go like this and then change directions and just keep it going, that makes a nice smooth transition between the two horizontal and vertical joints. It's especially useful around outlets. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to get things too perfect too quick. Not realizing that by trying to get it perfect, they're actually doing more harm than good because they're not building the mud up enough. So that's good. Don't worry about spots like that. That'll fill right in on the next coat. Now, once I'm done with those joints, I'll go through and get the smaller stuff with the 6-inch knife. Now, a lot of times when I used to do a lot of taping on jobs, which I don't really do anymore, but when I did do it, I would insist that we had to have air conditioning going, or if it was in the wintertime, we'd have to have some sort of fan and heat going, because I want this stuff to dry as fast as possible. When you have the air conditioner going, it's the best, because you can wipe these joints down right here, and 10 minutes later you can go back and do another coat on them. So that works out really well. You can really exponentially speed up the process by just having the humidity taken out of the air. And if you have a wood stove in a house, that works pretty well too for the wintertime. If you don't have some sort of dehumidification going, you're wasting time waiting for things, because you could come back the next day and things aren't dry yet. Now, for this special corner tape, I'll show you how to do a second coat and final coat on that. So basically, you don't want to get to the inside, the apex of the corner. You don't want to reach that. You just want to put it about 1/2 inch from there or so. So you just put a little bit of mud there. All you're doing is smoothing out the transition between the edge of the mud here and this little bit on the edge of this paper tape. So once you get that on, take the knife at a pretty extreme angle. Just run it down like that. And that's it. That's ready to be sponged out. You don't need to do a third coat on that. So now I'm ready to do the third coat, the final coat on everything. The nice thing about this is I don't have to worry about the corners at all this time. So I'm only worried about the flats, the taper joints and the butt joints, and then the screw holes. So you get a lot of different opinions about people diluting the mix or using a lighter mix. So in other words, they'll either add water to the regular green bucket, or they will just get the blue bucket or some other sort of lighter mix for the third coat. I don't do that. I just use regular green bucket, non-diluted. The first thing, just like any of the other coats, make sure you scrape it. That's all the scraping you need to do. I like to refer to this process as wax on, wax off. That's the third coat. So put it on real heavy. Go a little bit past where you were before. And just like the coat before, you want to let it set for a few seconds just to soak into the layer before that, to wet it down so that they kind of melt together. The difference is this time you want to take pretty much everything that you can back off of it. So you don't want to leave any ridges anywheres. I like to still start out on the edges though and kind of get a real sharp angle and also keep a slight tilt on the blade too. Now, depending on how well you do this, that determines whether you have to sand or not. In my case, that's super smooth right now. So, if you look at that, that's pretty much ready to paint. So the only thing I need to do to that, once it's dry, which only takes a few minutes, is just lightly touch up the edges with a damp sponge, and then that's ready to paint. No sanding needed. And literally, if you have an air conditioner going, this will take 10 minutes and you'll be able to sponge it out, and in another 10 minutes and you can paint it. But it really is all about the blade angle. So you want to put it on there pretty flat, and then when you take it off, put a real good angle. Press pretty hard. And if you're going along and you need to scrape something, but you got mud on your knife, just take the knife the way that you're gonna put the mud on and scrape it like that. Then all the dry stuff ends up on the back of it, and then you can just wipe it on your hawk or whatever. You can actually just put it right back in your mud because it'll melt with everything else. It'll turn wet and then it'll just kind of combine with it. But so the name of the game is really about getting your first and second layer thick enough where the third layer you're only smoothing it out. You don't want to have to try to build up on the third coat, because then you got to do another coat after that. I find that by taking off the mud like this, at a tilt like that, it kind of cuts it sharper and it doesn't leave ridges. Like if you have one little bump that sticks down, it'll kind of skip along. But if you turn it to the side like this, it's so much less likely to do that. So like I said, when I'm sponging this out, I'm not even going in the middle of it and sanding. I'm only sanding between the dry paper and where the mud starts. That's it. I'll show you that in a minute. So now that this room is ready to sponge out, this is what I like to use for the sponge. So it has a rough side and a smooth side. I never use the rough side, but the reason I get this is because it's got a sharp point on it that you can get into the corners with. So the best way to do this is to have a light in one hand and have the sponge in the other. So what I like to do is get it wet, wring it out most of the way, now if you look at that wall, there's almost nothing that I need to do to it, but I want to feather out the edges. So with a nice clean sponge, I go around the edge and just sort of blend it in to where the paper is. And that's about all you can get right there. Both sides of this. So that's like 3 feet and 3 feet. And that's about all you're gonna get out of this sponge. Once there's some residue on the sponge, you wanna dip it again and get that residue off. Because if you leave that residue on, what happens is it starts taking off too much material. So that's done and it's ready to paint. You don't want to rub on one spot too long either, because it'll take away too much material. So again, you just take it like this, and that's done. And that's about all you get, and then you got to dip it again. Don't be lazy about it, you got to dip it often, very often. You can see there's just a little bit of residue on there. You might be able to get a little bit more out of it, but not too much. Keep that light a foot from the wall so you can see what's going on. Now in these corners, it's better to get the sponge a little bit wetter, because you're going to have a little bit thicker of residue on this paper. Everything inside of this should be ready to paint. You shouldn't have to do anything to it. But if you do see something, that's the whole purpose of having the light there, so you can see something. So you can see there's that little tiny spot right there. I don't know if you can see that, but just sand that out a little bit. Good to go. So if you do come across a spot like that right there that needs to be gotten, that's like a low spot that needs to be filled in just a little bit, wet the whole thing down around it, which partially sands it, and then take your mud, just a little bit on a knife. Now, the stuff that you just put on there, you don't have to sand the edges. So usually when I'm going around and doing the sponging, I keep just a little bit of mud on a knife, just handy. That way I can get little spots like that as I'm going along. But I don't need to worry about going back and smoothing it out afterwards, because you wet it down around the area first and then get it, and it smooths it right down so you don't have to do anything when you're done. So like I said earlier, I'm gonna do a sheetrock jam, or return I guess you could call it, around all these windows. So it's just the apron. So the apron is the sill, and then sheetrock return on the sides and top. So I need some shim material to make this work that I don't have. So for tonight, I'm gonna stop with this. Instead of putting the returns on, I'm gonna go ahead and paint this room. Most of the paints that you buy nowadays have a primer built into it, but if you use a primer by itself, it's a lot cheaper. And I had them tint it to the color that I want. So it's the same exact color that I'm painting with the regular paint. So this is $100 for 5 gallons versus $200 for 5 gallons. And for the first coat, it's gonna use up a lot of paint. You can use the 1 coat coverage on these walls, but I guarantee you it's not gonna cover like you want, because you need a primer on this first. If it had a primer on it, you could do 1 coat of the 1 coat coverage. So doing it this way will save me hundreds of dollars over the course of the whole house. And I'm using the same paint on the ceilings as I do the walls. A lot of people are gonna disagree with that, but I've been doing this for long enough to know that the shade that casts on the ceiling is different than the walls, even if you have the same color. So it always looks different than the walls, no matter what you do. Most people put a ceiling white on the ceiling, but I don't care about that. I just want it the same color. It's so much less work to not have to cut in, and anything that can save me time, I'm all for that. What's your shirt say? The back of it? Ninja in training. What are you doing there, Noah? You're mudding? Are you taping?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Do your little dance, come on.
No, do the fancy pants dance.
So one last thing I wanted to share with you guys before we end this video. This skylight here, I'm gonna get this all finished up. So when it was still really cold out, I noticed that there was some condensation forming right along here, because this is the aluminum flashing that was outside, and being exposed to cold weather will make it condensate. So all along the perimeter here, it was condensating. So I came up with a plan. There's a flange in here that has a groove that's about 9/16 wide, and it's tapered, so you can basically put a piece of sheetrock right up into it, and then that way you don't have to feather this edge at all. The sheetrock tucks into there, which is pretty nice. If you've ever used these Velux skylights, they have a nice system. But I need to thermally break that from everything somehow. So I came up with using 1/2" XPS foam, and I'm not going to use it for the whole jam here, but I do want to use it for at least like a little bit coming down here. So what I figured is I can come down to about right here. This is where these ribs are here. So I'll come down to about halfway there with the foam. Then that way I'm thermally broken from there to there, and I won't have any more condensation. And that foam seems to still work with the drywall compound, so I can tape the joint there just like anything else. So it'll look like it's all one piece, and you won't even know that it's a transition between the foam and the sheetrock. So that's the finished product of that skylight. You'd never even know that there was foam and sheetrock combined there. So I know this video is getting kind of long, but let me show you what I'm working on currently to finish up this room. I wanted to do the whole house with no baseboard since I'm not really having any flooring. Other than in the bathrooms, I'm gonna have tile, so I need baseboard to cover up the cuts on the tile. But the whole purpose of baseboard is pretty much to hide the cuts of the flooring. That's always been the purpose of all kinds of trim. Like this trim is to hide between the jamb and the sheetrock, and then the baseboard is to hide the cuts on the floor. So basically baseboard and trim and molding is always to hide something. So I figured if I could get away with not using it wherever I could, that would be the best. So what I did is took some of this 5-fuse tape here and I ran the joint compound all the way on the bottom to take up the gap using this stuff, and I put this right on the floor, flat on the floor, and then I spackled over that. And then right now I'm cleaning it all up to make a nice clean edge. And so actually that's just 2 coats, and I think it's good enough. Right now we're getting ready to put the epoxy paint on the floor. So I'm using self-leveling compound to take up any low spots, and then I'll sand them down to put the epoxy on. But you can see that's a nice crisp edge there. Perfectly straight and crisp lines to meet up with the floor. And so I'm accomplishing that by taking a sponge, the same one I'm using for the sheetrock, and I just sort of go like this. And you can only go a few feet and then you gotta wet it down again. But you can see that spot right there is good. And so I just gotta finish this up along this wall, and then I will take the wall paint and overlap it onto the floor just a little bit. And I know it probably will crack right at that apex of the corner, but that's what they make caulk for. We're gonna try it out in this room. I think it's gonna work just fine, but before I go do it in the rest of the house, we'll just try it in this room. I can always put baseboard on, that's not a problem. But since I'm not using something on the floor that I need to cut and have a rough edge there, I figured this is the best time that I could get away with this. The real drive in doing this is just to have a more simple look. There's just no need to have baseboard if you don't have to have it. And so right now the only thing that I need trim for is these doors. And the windows don't need any trim. So the whole house will have no trim around the windows, no baseboard. So only trim around the doors. And I know that doesn't quite match everything else, but I think it looks fine. I put that little hatch door in there. I think that looks pretty good. so we got 2 coats on the floor. This is an epoxy paint meant for mainly garages and stuff, so it's very durable. So, got a lot of stuff done in here. So I painted that door just to see if we like the color. I think we're going to keep that. And then the floor kind of is what it is. I like that. And then we're going to paint these doors the same color as that. I think we're going to keep the trim clear like that. I don't think we're going to paint it. I know it looks weird because the jamb is painted. Well, it will be painted anyways, but I don't know. We're going to keep that like that. We can always paint this trim the same color as the door like you normally would, but I think I like it like that. Got that little hatch right there. And so this is one of the coolest things about this whole project is having no baseboard on the floor. What do you guys think about that? That looks pretty good. Nice, crisp, clean lines there. I put 2 coats of poly on this. Actually, it's not poly, it's a spar urethane. This is the stuff that I'm using right here, and it's more UV resistant. And I'm doing a satin finish, not anything glossy. But it's more UV resistant because this windowsill is always going to see UV rays, so I wanted something that's going to last. Poly isn't quite up to the task, polyurethane. But this should hopefully last a long time without fading. So it's just a few more hours worth of work in here. Just gotta paint those doors. I gotta put shelves in the closet. I gotta tape and paint the closet. I gotta do some work up there. Kind of the same thing. And then obviously that needs to all be reconfigured once we get the geo system. This is the finish we used on the floor. So far I'm pretty happy with it, but only time will tell, so we'll see how that goes. This is kind of like the test run for everything in the whole house, because everything is going to be exactly the same as this room. Everything in the whole house is going to have the same finishes as this room, so this is kind of the test run to make sure we like the colors, we like the shines, we like the styles. Everything is going to be the same in the rest of the house, so there's no point in me really showing the rest of the finishing the house. This room is going to be the same as everything else. So I think everything so far, all of us like it, so I think we're going to stick with everything.
Yeah, I like this.
Like the color?
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially up there.
Yeah.
Makes it look so good.
Yep. What's really nice about this sill here is that it's the right height that you can actually sit on it. Well, an adult can. Try to sit on that, Kaden. You can sit on it. Yeah. Noah might have a hard time, but at least Kaden can do it. That's a cool place to sit. And it's really sturdy because I put construction adhesive as well as some trim screws. So I almost did it like a tile, like you put liquid underneath and then squish it down so it's nice and solid. And then of course this 1x3 that I put underneath here helps support the edge here too. So, and I rounded over the edges. Everything is rounded over. So
Noah doesn't bonk his head.
yeah. But I got all the outlets and covers in, and I got a dimmer switch here. This is the caseta or however you want to say it. So it's all wireless. It's got a dimmer on it. So that's nice. It dims really low too, like barely even on. And you hit this button and it goes all the way up. But it's also wireless, so you can control it from your phone and you can control it from several different locations if you want, which in this room isn't important, but those are the switches we're going to be using for the rest of the house. So that's it for this video, guys. We got a lot longer than I thought. There's a lot of details. I didn't really expect to put them all in there, but I figured if we're doing a taping video, you guys should know everything that I know. I'm pretty sure I taught you everything I know. Most of it anyways. So that's it for this one, and I'll see you guys on the next video.
Bye.